Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. We do have some new names to the group, but it's nice to see some familiar names as well. And we are in our second overarching idea that we're unfolding with you now, which is really the part on matter. So welcome. We've got a new slide vision for you, a little new slide deck, so you're not always seeing the same thing over and over and again. And again, just a reminder that we'll post these and you will have access to recordings and you'll have access to any of the resources that we put that are extra over and above this. So welcome back. My name is Chris Arski. I'm one of the consultants with the CART Consortia, and I have an absolutely fantastic partner who's going to wow you with all of the concepts and assessment, and I'll let Ted introduce himself.
Well, thanks, Chris. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortia out of Sherwood Park right now, where I've been past teaching administrator, and so it's good to be working on this end with the science curriculum. Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. I get the good fortune of doing the structural part, and Chris does give you the fun part of giving a lot of cool learning ideas. So we'll get to her next. And
okay, all right, well, here we go, folks. Let's get our sleeves ready to go. I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement, and I am going to start with a short video. Some of you might have seen this, so if you were in the first one, then you will have seen this one already. If you're multitasking, we totally understand that. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. I won't show the same one every time, but because we do a land acknowledgement, the purpose behind that is for us to really, it's not just part of Truth and Reconciliation amendments that we have, but it's also to acknowledge really the history of our world or our country that we haven't done a deep dive into. And so the little video that I have for you is just an overview of that and why perhaps we might want to consider it in those lights, and wherever we can bring this into our teaching, we want to do that, as we will do as we're following through on any of our lessons that we prepare for you, where there are opportunities for us to infuse First Nations learnings into it. We will do that. Okay, so let me bring this up for you. Let me know if you can't hear it.
Water is in this story, the origin of life. Talks about these women, grandmothers, that were asked by the Creator which ones will come here. First one, Creator asked, he made that one the moon, grandmother. Second one, he made into Mother Earth. The third one, he made into water. That's the life. There's lots of life in that water. It's a woman, grandmother. The fourth one, he made into an image of woman we see walking around on earth today. That one carry life into this world for the Creator. That's where we're born from. And there's more to that. But for now, just so you know, for us people, What we're trying to do is preserve what we have. Canada is built on our traditions, built on our stories, because we were the first ones here. Everything that Canada is come from us. So if you go back to that story and know where we come from, the woman is strong, but today the woman voice is taken out of decision-making process in this system. That's why there's chaos. There's no more balance in that with respect to how the relationships go. That's what I was told by my grandfathers in my ceremony. We always hear this term growing up. What kind of a world are we going to leave for our children? Everything's being poisoned off. I ask, what kind of a child are we going to leave for the world? If we don't teach our children the proper way to respect Mother Earth, if we don't talk to our children and our grandchildren how to respect the environment, how to respect those birds, those animals, the trees, what kind of a world is that going to be?
Okay. So it's our hope that as we move forward, you're going to feel comfortable with the materials that are being presented and your new curriculum. I know many of you are piloting this. Some of you are here just to gather right now information as you move forward for next year. Yeah. But it's really important, I think, that we, Ted and I, feel that at least when you walk away from here, you have that feeling that you have a bit of a sense of direction and understanding of maybe where that curriculum is asking us to go. It's not going to be perfect. And in an hour, we can't really give you the whole unit, but we'll give you ideas that we can certainly share with you. And maybe you walk away with one or two that you'll be able to use as you start to prepare that. So again, that efficacy, that you feel like you have some tools in your toolbox, that you're not sort of left on your own. To find it all the way through. So in our sessions, we just really ask that, you know, when you're here, feel free to engage with us. Feel free if you've taught the unit before already and you have things you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Just unmute yourself. Chat box is great. And if you would feel more comfortable with that, that's great. But sometimes we miss it when we're talking, we don't always see what's going on. And then just, you know, as I say, being present with us is a real bonus for us as well, so that we're not sort of just talking to Ted and I, and that's a great thing. Okay, so let's look a little bit at, as we unfold this, we know that there are some places that you won't have units, and that really just in grade 1 is in this space area. So other than that, you'll be joining us for all of the organizing idea. We do one a session. And what we want to spend a little bit of time on is just reminding, we're not going to go through this whole document. If you're new to the group, we hope that you've watched session 1 already, and you also have access to the other sessions to look at. I'll show you where, if you're new or have forgotten, I'll show you how to get there at the end. But what we want to spend our time on is just reminding you that we're always unpacking an organizing idea, and that's always the one found in the darkest line. The one we're doing right now, the first word behind it in this case is matter. And so we are looking at what is common in matter, which is grade 1 through grade 6, or kindergarten through grade 6, sorry, which all have the same understandings of physical world and deepening through investigating matter and energy. So it's a common theme. So when people are talking about where are the essential rocks, those big ideas, this is where those big ideas sit. And this is where we need to always make sure that we're all finding them in the same way. So we're going to be unpacking this one today. We're going to be unpacking it from the lens of concepts. And we're hoping that you are too, because that's your big rocks. And so in the end, you don't have to have done matter or be doing matter when we're bringing it up. You might leave it until the end of the year. The order is insignificant at this point. However, what we want to do is make sure that everybody's seeing the same big rocks and that we're all sort of targeting those same areas. So when we talk about some of those documents that we have, this one is being the biggest one, There was some wording in that curriculum document that we just want to bring up again for this session. And that is those keywords of include, such as, and then when I see things in brackets, I may not see things in brackets. But let's just quickly revisit. This is one of our ones that we're talking about today. Measurable properties of objects include length, area, and mass. So anything that comes behind the word include is a requirement. It's not an optional. So somewhere in our lesson, we have to make sure that all of those words are used. It is not in any way suggesting that those are the only words that are used. All right. You can absolutely address other things if you have had success with infusing other strategies and other terminology that help enhance that. By all means, you're not throwing away best practices, but you must include those three in your structured lesson. The second one is such as, gives us a little bit more flexibility. So things that come behind such as are exemplars. You can choose to use them. You can choose to use them and use your own. You can choose to just read it, ignore it because you think my children aren't going to resonate with that, and use your own completely. Absolutely fine. As long as we're meeting the outcome, it doesn't matter. So such as has a little bit more flexibility in it. And we don't have any in this particular set that we're going to be doing today for matter. But if you do have words that are in brackets, those are terminologies that must be taught to the students, and they need to know them. However, when I'm talking to them and when I may be doing the activity with them, I might not use that word every time that I go to address it. I might put it in more user-friendly kindergarten language or grade 1 language or grade 2 language so that it's just a little bit more user-friendly for the child. So again, you have that ability to switch that around as needed. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who is going to wow you now with some concepts, which are going to be really important when I unpack your unit as well. Okay, take it away, Ted.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I got to wow you guys. I'll try to do my best. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be providing sort of a way to look at the curriculum and provide some examples where I can of how to engage with the curriculum. And then what Chris is going to do after is give a lot of really neat resources and activities and ideas that'll sort of fill that framework that I'm going to attempt to build here with you. But I was really glad that Chris shared with you that video at the opening about the story of creation, because I think it raises a couple things as we look ahead to our future. We know that there is a very uncertain future facing ourselves and especially our kids. I think the question on the video that Chris showed is, what do we want our children to be like? And we get that feeling by when we think about a future as well. We know that with technology, the social media, there's so many things that we question now, so many things that our kids are faced with deciding and thinking about and being exposed to that we just never really had that milieu before. As well, we know that technology is taking us to brand new ways that make us wonder, what do we really need to be able to know and do in the future? And I'm going to get Chris to quickly play a short little 30-second video to show you what I mean by what are we as human beings going to be needing to do down the road. Go ahead, Chris. So technology, where it's at, raises many, many concerns, right, in terms of what will we need our students to be able to do. Before I go on, I know that when I was listening to Chris, she was breaking up a little bit off and on. I'm not too sure if it was my or some other thing. If you can't hear me, if I'm breaking up, please interrupt, or Chris, interrupt and let me know, so that maybe Chris, you might have to take over if I'm not coming in very clearly.
Okay, I didn't realize that, Ted, but thanks for saying that. It could be the weather because you are breaking up a bit, but I didn't realize I was too. So you guys, please let us know in the chat box if something's changed and you can't make out what we're saying. We can always, if we have to, just stop it. We can record it and send it, but we prefer to do it with you. Okay, go ahead, Ted.
So based on just what we know about that future, if I was to ask you, what is it that we need our kids to be able to learn and do, you would probably come across many of the things listed in the competencies document for kids. So we can go to that slide, Chris. That document you can see located in the ULearn Alberta document. They're listed in the competencies themselves are broken down per grade or per division, excuse me. And the things that probably we really want our kids to be able to know and do. We want them to know and have good literacy and numeracy skills as well, which we can build into our learning. But also we want to make sure that when we unpack this curriculum, that we hit some of these competencies. And the way we're going to be doing that, as you'll see, is really being very intentional with how we unpack this curriculum and the activities we get our students to do, because certain activities are going to bring out certain competencies or certain abilities than others. And we'll want to make sure that we're intentional when we choose certain activities. Those of you who have been with me, who were at the first session, we're going to change this up a little bit on here. So hopefully you'll get something new out of this front end part. Next slide, please, Chris. I'd like to begin by just looking at a activity that you're familiar with, or having you do a quick activity with me that you're familiar with. It's called the concept of term attainment. I'm sure you probably use this in your class, but if you haven't, it's an activity that I would show these one at a time if I was doing it with students, or a pair at a time. You can see the items on the yes have the characteristic of the idea that I have in mind. So a story, shoe, shovel, and novel are all examples of the idea that I want to share with you. Right is not example. Jog, aluminum, and Gone with the Wind aren't. And if I can go to the next slide, Chris, I have some other examples for you. I'd just like you to give a moment to think about, whoopsie, that's all right. What it is that where those other things may courage, water, truth, and so on. You can go to that slide. Yeah. Where would those fit? Which are the examples and the non-examples? Is courage an example? Is it a yes or is it a no? And if it's a yes, why? What makes it so? Is Christmas an example or a non-example? If it is an example, why? If it's not, what is it missing? Next slide, Chris. And again, I'm going through this a little bit quicker just to save some time. What we're looking at for in the yes column are all the things that are concepts: courage, truth, novel, shovel, shoe, story. They are all concepts. Gone with the Wind is not, because it's a one specific item of thing. I'm very specific as to what it is. Jog and write are things we do. They're not ideas per se. So that is what we're going to look at the start of this as we unpack this curriculum, are finding all those concepts in the curriculum or in this unit of study or organizing idea. And that we're going to be investigators, and we're going to be looking through the curriculum through something called a conceptual lens. We can leave it there again. That's just the definition there. It's on the slide deck that you'll have a copy of. That concepts are organizing ideas of one or two words with distinct attributes that are shared across multiple examples. So we take there are multiple examples of things. We'd have a car. They can look differently and shape differently, but we still call a car, but we don't call a truck a car because it has a different attribute. It's shared in that it's got four wheels. It's a vehicle, but it's got some other critical attributes that separate it from a car and make it a truck. And of course, there are some gray areas. That vehicle, it is called an El Camino if you're curious about that. So those are concepts are the kind of like filing folders that we just put things that are all similar in it, and the things that are in that folder all share something in common, and that's what concepts essentially are. The more you look at concepts, you can look at the world through something called concepts or conceptual lens. If you look at this picture, for example, and if I was to give you a concept and to look at through that lens of that concept, you'd see something different. If I asked you to look at this photograph through the lens of resources, your focus shift. You would look at perhaps water as being a resource, the sand as being a resource for playgrounds, for whatever. The beach itself may be a resource, a natural resource. So you'd see those kinds of things. But if I asked you to look at this picture through concept lens of senses, you focus different. Maybe it's the coolness of the water. Maybe it's the smell of the water. If it's by a slough, the stagnant smell of the slough. The freshness of the air, you'd focus on different things. And so that's what I want to do with you today, is take you through the curriculum using two different conceptual. Go ahead, Chris, thanks. Just to make other key points about the concepts is we know that they can be very specific or very general. Car or truck, for example, are quite specific. And not as general as transportation is, or vehicle. Broaden ideas, the more you'll see appear in various disciplines. So something like, I guess, change or system would appear in many different curriculums. So change or systems appears in science, it could appear in social studies, it could appear in many different areas. It's so broad and abstract. So that's one thing to keep in mind with concepts. And the other thing is that we can organize concepts in some kind of meaningful way. We can connect them with each other, because all concepts, or not all concepts, but we can take our concepts and create a relationship, and that relationship provides meaning for us. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that the organized matter is organized into concepts. And you'll get a copy of this later. Where we can take a look at objects, whether the natural constructive properties, and some of them are identified there. Some of them can be measured, or some of them are observed properties, which we can gather information through our senses. And so the properties of objects, such as length, size, area, and texture, can change. And you can see then how you can get a good picture of what's in the organizing idea through something called the concept map. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the organizing idea then through the lens of concepts. So by doing that, what I would like you to do is focus on the concepts. We've got the learning outcome, that students analyze properties of natural and constructed objects and investigate how they can be changed. And then we have, of course, the associated cusps, or the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures at you as concepts.
So in case Ted cut out, what we're asking you to do is just jot down on a piece of paper. You don't have to share it with anybody, or if you're in a room with someone else. If you can find the concepts in this piece that you're looking at here, just jotting the words down.
And what you may want to do then, Chris, is go to the next slide. I apologize with the breaking up. Today and yesterday is the first time this has been happening to me, so it likely is the snow. I've highlighted the words that are concepts in this particular instance, both in the learning outcome and in the cusps. And you'll notice something very interesting, that they're repeated throughout themselves. They're throughout the whole this broad spectrum. And that certainly makes sense when you think about the skills and procedures are there to help create an understanding and a deep understanding of the knowledge and skills. So by combining the things together, we get an understanding, and that understanding is composed once again of those key concepts. So it's important to identify those, because those are the ones you want to hammer hard. Chris is going to show you a lot of really neat ways to bring those to life and to help kids understand them both at a surface and a deep level. But there are some other concepts there that aren't identified, and I call those skill-related concepts. We can go to the next slide, Chris. When you take a look at the skills, there's always a concept related to them. And what I mean is this. If you analyze something, you're going to create an analysis. When you describe something, you're going to create a description of something. If you investigate something, you're going to create an investigation. And so those things themselves, if something to be considered an investigation, it's certain things have to happen. For something to be a description, it's got to have certain qualities to it that we could say, ah, yes, this is a description. So we have to keep those in mind too as we wade our way through the curriculum. So we're going to switch lenses. And we're going to move to the lens of the skills and procedures. And they're the doing or the action or the thinking words that are associated. And those are on, of course, the right-hand column of the learning outcome. And so some things to keep in mind when you're looking at the skills and procedures through and identifying them. Oh, Chris, if we go to the next slide. Take your time to identify the skill is my first tip. I bolded them so that you can see, ask questions, identify, describe, compare. These are, that's the first thing you'll want to do. And they're typically at the front end, of course. But after you do that, I'd like you to keep in mind the second thing. Tip number 2 is that sometimes the verb really clear of what's being asked. Ask questions is fairly straightforward, but when you take a look at the verb identify, in this case, identify properties of objects, we're not too sure what it means. It may mean, well, identify something in the objects that are properties. But when you look at the item, it says describe the properties of objects. Then we get the sense that all they're really looking for that one is to state the properties of objects, and know that properties of objects include length, area, and mass. Identify that, state that. But then the next cusp or the next statement does ask us objects using those properties, or identify the characteristics of the property of the objects based on those properties. So you can see with the gold parts that we're looking at, you have to be careful of what they're really asking. I think we have to try to clarify that with ourselves to clarify the skill. Even with the skill and use various tools, really there's 2 things. Use various tools. So if it's a balance, you want to know how to use it, but then also want kids to demonstrate safety when they're investigating things. So we kind of have to be careful and tease them out. So once you've got that, then there's a little bit more things, or a few more things to consider. Page, please, Chris. Keep in mind that when you look at those statements and the skills and procedures, there are 2 components that create their structure. The first part, as we've kind of seen, is the skill or procedure word, and then the knowledge part. It's important to keep that in mind, because what you want to do is keep your intention clear. You may be seemingly want to just have kids give that as a task for them to do, but it becomes problematic because you're not too sure if they're having trouble. You're not too sure the part that they're having trouble with, the knowledge part. So you want to separate them out, make sure we give instruction to the skill and instruction to the knowledge before you combine the knowledge that the kids are responsible to know. So they're not competing with each other in terms of their focus and your assessment and your feedback of them. Once they're competent in the knowledge, then you can use that skill for them to demonstrate what they know about that knowledge, whether it be comparing things or summarizing things or so on. The next slide kind of highlights that a little bit more. Actually, yeah, so you can see that there's the 2 parts, right? The bold part is the second part's related directly to content. And we see that we're kind of glued to that's the only time we're going to have kids ask questions about observed objects. But when you think about it, and same with describe and predict and discuss, that's not the only time really that we want kids to do those things. If we take something that's fairly, well, we just do that, right? We're going to talk about it as a class. But if you stop and really focus on the skill of discuss and a formal discussion and what's involved, and practice it outside of the knowledge that's listed there, the discussion about bending or twisting will be that much more meaningful. Hattie said that a formal discussion is one of the things that has a huge impact on student learning when it's done correctly. So it's not just put up your hand and tell me your opinion. If you stop and break discussion down, there are a lot of things that can happen in the classroom to really formalize it and to make it a really effective learning tool. And oh, no, not the final tip. I got one more. But what I want to do is once you isolate those verbs, there's different ways you could teach skills. The one that I want to talk about today that's a teaching strategy that is found to be effective, especially when it comes to teaching critical thinking, is something called a skills teaching lab. I'm going to use the verb of describing as an example of how you may want to, how you can impact this teaching strategy. So describing shows up quite a bit in all the science learning or organizing ideas. And so it is one of the key ideas, I think, to maybe look at. Chris, I'm going to have you go to the slide that has right there. With the steps in skills teaching, identify 10 of them there. I break them into the surface, deep, and transfer categories, and I'll talk about why I do that later. But this is the steps that the teacher should follow into teaching a skills lesson. If you go to the next slide, Chris, I'll refer to the steps as we go along, but the first one is to define the skill. You want to make sure that you know what it means to describe. What are you expecting? And so if you can keep going there, Chris. I want to make sure I know what it means. So it means telling a can about the properties of the object that you're observing. I highlighted those words because remember, properties, object, and observation are concepts. And you want to make sure that the kids know those before we even begin moving into this. But that's what describing is. You're going to sense the object based on their properties, and then you're going to tell about them. The second step is identifying the steps for the kids. So you tell this is what you would give to your kids. But when you're observing, you observe with your eyes, tell what you see, and use tools to help. I gotta change that. Step 5 should be observe with or use tools to measure. I just put it in there, but I'll separate that out. But if you break it down to those steps, and the kids will then now look at the properties, or observe the property with your hands, observe it with your ears, and so on. And then once you do that, then you will, and tell what you see, then you will be describing. Of course, you'll want to model it. So that would be the next steps. Or before you get into modeling, when you break down the steps, you'll notice that I had those 5 steps listed there. What you want to make sure is identify any concepts in the steps you have and determine which ones need to be taught to the students. If there's something that need to be taught, don't go into this under the kids know they'll understand those concepts. So next slide, I've highlighted the concepts in that list that I made. And you'll notice that they're basically concepts that are in the curriculum already. They are in the knowledge part. So we want to make sure that kids do that before you formally talk about describing to them. They're going to be doing it as they go along. They're going to be saying things. But when you stop and say, well, what are we doing here? What are we describing? Then you'll want to make sure they'll have had lots of practice, but they won't know they have until you formalize this process a little bit with them. Go ahead, Chris. And then, of course, you'll want to model the step. And this is with any skills teaching. Then you model the step. Go ahead. So, for example, you'll just do a think aloud, I suppose. You'd have something, and you would go through the process by thinking aloud and showing the students your thought as you go through it. Next step after modeling the skill is to give them opportunities for guided practice. Start with easy things so there's some success, and you can make things a little more complicated as you go. Make sure the practice is intermittent, not mass, so you don't do it all for every day for 2 weeks, then never do it again. It's better to do it intermittently along the way. and encourage students to talk about what they're doing, because that'll help with the next step, which is to deepen it. Chris, we'll go through the next few steps really quickly. So there's an example, just you'll have stuff in your classroom, and probably not pictures, you'll have real items, real things to use. And as Chris will mention later, you want to make sure that if you have students with allergies, that you'll want to make sure that if they're going to smell or taste something, that it's something that is not going to harm them in any way. So that's step 6. Step 7 is after you give them some guided practice, you can keep on giving more, or even upping the ante a little bit. You can give them something like this. It says, choose one of these items here and observe it carefully, and then describe it to your friend and see if they can identify what you're describing without you telling what exactly it is. The way you can deepen their understanding is to explore the skill at a conceptual level. And here's what I mean by that. Next slide. If you were to ask the question, why is it important to make careful observations after you did the activity where the student has to say, okay, think of pink and it's got this color and it has this texture and so on. After that exchange has happened, then we ask, why is it important to make careful observations about the properties of the objects if you want to make a description about that object? Now we can see we're connecting things together, and this is where the deeper understanding of the not concepts but the associated skill becomes a little bit more, I guess, deep is what I wanted to say. They could reflect on it, and finally, you'll want to provide opportunities to increase the novel and complicated context for that kids to practice that skill. So as you ask them to describe it, it'll happen in different settings and so on. That slide's going to come off. It shouldn't be there. It's not a good one anymore, so it'll disappear off your slide deck. Thanks, Chris. If you now, of course, just if you go back to the other slide, Chris. Don't have to click on it now, but as I mentioned, that every skill has its associated concept. So if you're describing, then perhaps it may be wise to even begin with what is a description, and so students can see what examples of descriptions are. And you can go through what that link is going to take you to is another concept attainment activity, like I did with you at the start of this session. But the focus concept will be description. So you can take a look at that. It may or may not be grade appropriate depending on your students in terms of complexity, but doing something like that to make sure that kids understand what description is before you go into the skill will really help, because they'll know what the end game is, what the product should look like at the end. Thanks, Chris. We can go on to the next one. So I just went through the 3 tips with you for when we're talking about skills and processes. Identify that skill, make sure you look at it, make sure it's clear to you, and then make sure if you're gonna use the skills of process statement the way it is, make sure they know what the skill is and are competent in that skill before you attach the content that they're required to know or understand or demonstrate to you. So if it's going to compare and contrast 2 things, make sure they know how to compare and contrast for. If they're going to and so on. If they're going to summarize something that they're responsible for, make sure they know how to summarize first. And one thing to keep in mind when you're looking through this as well, that some of the skills procedures are rooted in the science methods knowledge. So if you're stuck and you're wondering maybe where to go with some of those skills, there's a little chart that I put together for you that shows a bit of a correlation. So we know that in this organizing idea, asking questions about observed objects and things, but a connected understanding with that comes from the scientific methods, is that scientists perform investigations to satisfy curiosity or solve a problem or meet a need. That idea of questioning is embedded in there. So the point is that asking questions shouldn't just happen at this particular junction. That the questioning and curiosity is something that is ongoing. The there are some other connections with using tools, for example. So, and the idea of experimenting and investigation as well. The one item is on there. It says experiment with changing properties of objects. Yeah. So without having read the scientific methods part, which is just to the right of there, you wouldn't know that where you're really, when you're experimenting, you're doing an investigation that involves the process of asking that question, making a prediction about what will happen, and what the answer, or doing the observation and doing whatever, and then forming the conclusion. So sometimes it's good to look back to that section here just to help decide what it is that they're looking for. So those are 4 things to keep in mind. And now, reason we're taking our time to do this run in is because in order to really move where we need to move our kids so that they have what we hope they have when they leave our classrooms in our school to handle themselves and to be contributing members into that uncertain future, we need to move our kids through the curriculum, not but as a phases of learning. And we know at that start, and you've probably seen this Hattie, Fisher, and Fry process before, there's that surface learning where we got to give a solid understanding of that skill, solid understanding of that concept and those individual concepts before we can move on. And once they know those, we don't stop there. We do the quiz, they can define things, they know what that is, and so on. But then we forget to move on to making that deeper understanding part. And that's where they start making connections. And that's where I pose that one question: what's the relationship between an observation, properties, and description and objects? And if they can make those connections, you know they've got a deep understanding, because they wouldn't be able to do that without fully understanding the meaning. But not only that, now they know that the larger understanding here is that, yeah, objects have properties and we can observe. You look at those properties when we really want to describe something. Now that becomes an understanding and not just a memorization of 4 distinct terms, 2 different things. And, you know, that's where we hope to get our students to get at. And if we get to that transfer phase, that's even better. Now they can take that understanding they just took it out and take it out of the class they've seen and put that understanding into a new world, a new context. And if they can do that, we know that they've now transferred that understanding. We want to get them to surface and deep for sure. Okay. Next slide, please, Chris.
I'm just going to make a comment on that because I think Ted's comment there, it can't be understated. These are the levels that we're targeting. And at the very minimum, you would hit deep. Like that has to be your absolute lowest level that you would leave a unit with. Your goal should be transfer. It's the same thing if any of you have ever done depth of knowledge sessions with me or assessment sessions with me. You never go with a level 1. You never go with an entry level. This is just factual. It's just surface. If you're using the curriculum as a checklist, you're at that level 1, the surface level, and you need to make efforts to get out of that and into deep at some point. So when you're using depth of knowledge assignments, you're looking at a level 2 is your minimum target for any question that a child gets an assignment or an exam question from. You're going to have some factual questions always in the world. You can't get away from that, but that's not where we hang our hat. So this is a really important piece.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris, I would like to add one other thing is that, and maybe this can help, is that this is new to you. You're looking at the curriculum and how you're approaching this curriculum. And really, the same process can be applied to all the new curricula, really, not just science when you stop and think about it, because they're all organized the same way. And they all have the same cusps, and they all have knowledge, understanding for sure between this and the other curricula that way. But sometimes we can look at this, that I can never get that. I don't have the time. I can't do that. It's all about making baby steps. It's all about knowing that this is one way where you want to go and just taking one component of your lesson and working at that and refining that over time along. Because if we think we have to get there right now, tomorrow, it's going to be impossible to do. And it's going to be, don't put that pressure on yourself, but do have this and have this as something to aim for. Like I said, Chris is going to show you lots of other examples that'll help with that. You already probably know a lot of things that can help you at those, two of those things that I've done already at the surface level: direct instruction, concept attainment, and develop. Those are two ways that you can really work at the surface level. And then Chris is going to help show you some other things you can do at the deep level as well. And you'll find activities as you go along and resources those at those different levels as well. So keep that in mind as well. One more slide for me. Oh, maybe not. It's sorry, I'll try to go this, and then Chris will move along after this. When it comes to more ready for it, the next level, we do have to see where they're at. We have to do some assessing, some checking out to see what's happening. And I have some statements down that can help you determine whether a student has something at the surface level. If they can define it, if they can distinguish between examples and non-examples of that concept, if they can distinguish, you might ask them, what's the difference between volume and density? What's the difference between a compare and a contrast? And if they can distinguish those two that are close, they've got a really good understanding of both. Can they complete a skill or procedure? For example, if it was describing a thing, if you had that checklist in front of them, if they can do that and do an adequate description for you, we're at surface level. And then the deep is, can they demonstrate connection between those words and ideas? Can they either using words or visuals or some other way to state their understanding? Can they provide examples from other contexts and so on? So those and I'm not going to go through each one of them individually. There are certain things you can do that'll give you a hint that as to whether the student is ready for the next level. So it's a good assessment piece. If I'm going to give you the example assessment here, I'm going to use the idea of description and describe once again. So you may want to do this at the start of the year with your students to see where they're at. And you can ask them what description is to see what they have as an answer. Ask them which of these statements are descriptions, which are examples of descriptions. Or you can ask them for adding one more comment, which is number 3. One more thing about it's not a description. Of course, we want to focus on being able to provide a description. So that's where we go to the next page, right? You can have something for them to describe an object or something and have them and give them that instruction of, use your observation skills and to focus in on the properties of the object description of it. What are you going to come up with? And then ask them, what's the difference between an observation and a description? Those are two close concepts, but they're different. And at a surface level, a solid surface level, so that's where you're assessing it. Do they have a solid understanding of those individual words? They'll distinguish those for you. And then we move on to deep. That's where I just use that same example again. So there are more examples you can use to provide that. And finally, you want to ask that question. Your assessment is if they can somehow answer the idea that you have there. And if you take a look at the that I have there, so tell me why it's important to make careful observation of the properties. If you take a look at that purple statement and the very first understanding in this organizing unit, you'll find that the answer they come up with is going to be very close to that understanding, and which is where you want them to be, right? And finally, transfer. A quickie is to see if a student is ready to transfer some ideas. Is to give them some scenarios. If say, where would you use a description? Which of these 4 scenarios would you use the description? All of them, one of them, 2 of them, 3 of them. If they understand, they'll be able to take it to that context and be able to apply it and say, no, I wouldn't use the description there. I'd use something else. So if you want to explain to someone why your toy is the best, you may have description in it, but you're not going to use the description. Well, my toy is the best because it's red, it's pink, and it's this tall. You'll do something else. Or you can do something like example B. You're hired by a school to make an amazing commercial for the best spot in your schoolyard. Choose one spot, observe it, and make a commercial out of your description. Now we're applying that, transferring it to something new. And one more, I'm getting Chris on because she's got a whole bunch more examples. Sometimes just to help you keep track of where you're at, intentionality. So when you find ideas and you find good things on the internet, make sure you know where it fits and intentionally use those activities that you know that you're at surface, you're at deep, or you're at transfer. To help you organize your thoughts, there's a planning tool you may want to look at. And I won't take too much longer. It may be helpful. I filled it in already just based on the activity that I did with you, that skills activity on describing. And so there's with this document, I guess, thanks, Chris, there's two parts to it. There's the planning things on the front end, and there's that concept map on the sheet associated with this document. All right. Each of those things are drop-down menus, so you can focus what you want to do. If you want to focus on skill concepts and the key skills, those are both down and drop-down menus as well. Description shows up because it's not in the drop-down menu yet. So this helps. So these are the two things I wanted to accomplish with you today, was to give an example of how to get kids to describe and an example of what description is. And there's my resources and my skill teachers activities. I don't have the link to it yet. And then I have links to those assessments that I showed you there as well. And I would keep building this as I went along, so I wouldn't keep track of everything, know where I am, know all the links, and everything's all in one spot. So if it's helpful to you, go ahead and use it. And hopefully it is. And that finishes my spot. And now Chris is going to take things. And again, as she's doing it, maybe go through that, look at it through the lens of deep, surface, and transfer as well, to see if you can see, hey, this would fit good with surface or deep or transfer. So thanks, Chris. You're up.
Are there any questions just while it's fresh in your mind? Anything that you saw about the assessment, about the terminology, the levels that you might want to bring forward to TED?
If maybe I should add, Chris, if you're interested in planning some more things, then you need some help or something, you want some feedback, by all means, please email me or Chris. I'm more than happy to help out to get that done. What I'm looking at doing is planning is some sessions, stop and take a close look at surface, what that means, how to plan some lessons together, activities together, and then how to assess them. So hopefully we'll have those running pretty soon.
Okay, well, we're going to try and unpack some of this and maybe give you, hopefully, some tools that might be helpful for you in your planning. If you're not new to grade 1, then you probably already have some materials that you've been using. But just a couple of points I want to start with before I go into this slide deck, and that is the opening piece that we showed you with the acknowledgement. If you caught it, I purposely also left it there because it was about matter, right? It shows you with the icicle was melting at the time, and it talks about water. So it's a great intro that maybe kids don't even catch right away as they're going through it. And the other piece that I want to just bring up for you to consider also, and Ted and I do a lot of talking back and forth. We're on with each other every day, pretty much chatting. But one of the things that is really starting to hit me in unpacking this new science curriculum is a couple of things. First of all, we are quite used to in science having a discrete unit of topic that's assigned to your grade. So you did space in grade 6, you did this in grade 1, this in grade 2. And it was stop. That was my stop on that topic. It didn't really come back again anywhere else. You kind of really did a good job of it there. That's not the case now. You are finding, or your curriculum now is very much of a carryover of building. So for those of you that are doing the math with us as well, you know that we created bridging in our year at a glance, but in some respects, I'm also being very cognizant now, and this is why I want to bring it up. you really have to start thinking about the kiddos that landed at your door this year did not get science last year. So what is in your curriculum that we're going to talk about today, in fact, is very much hinged on what happened in kindergarten. So there is some bridging that has to happen in the science this year, for sure, if you really want to test out kind of how things are going. So I really want you to think about that, because you can't do today's lesson that we're going to talk about, or today's unit that we're talking about in matter for grade 1. You cannot do it in the absence of the kindergarten knowledge. So you may have to go back and do a little bit of that. You have access to all of the folders anyway. You're absolutely able to go back. I've included in the slide deck the pieces that are relevant that I think might help support if you need to go back. If you don't, and you already did something like that, or you haven't planned for it yet, then I'm just throwing out ideas of things that you really, really have to consider that they may not have all of the info for. So in our grade 1 unpacking, we are looking at matter. So just carrying on again, but we're looking at matter sort of from 3 different lenses. Whoops. And that would be that we're looking at the properties, which in theory, a grade 1 student already knows, because we really unpacked that word in kindergarten. And so if I haven't unpacked it, then I need to do a little bit of legwork there. I will have to go back. You cannot assume, and you don't want to turn this into a stand up and deliver and just put a bunch of words on the board. That's not going to be very helpful. We're talking about examining those properties with just common tools, right? And that's the other piece that I'm struggling a little bit with, is sometimes the start and end in a grade isn't really well defined. There's a lot of gray areas, and sometimes you think, wow, we should be talking about this, but we're not, because it's not coming until another grade. So again, you're just, in some respects, you're putting some boundaries on just talking little baby steps at a time, which does give you time to unpack and go back a little bit. You don't have to do the whole world in one shot. And then the other piece is, how do we change? How do some of the properties change? Like, what happens to it? And we'll just go look at some examples of that. So here's the piece that I think I want to spend just a bit of time on, is you have to know a little bit about what would they have come to me with in a perfect world, or what should I go back and grab from the recording, let's say, of yesterday. So in kindergarten, they really define what is an object, and we don't define it. We actually teased it out with the students. And so I'm giving you the same activities that we did there, if you want to use them, because they lend themselves really well to doing the grade 1 activities as well. So they talk about what's the characteristics and properties of an object. So we define what an object is, and then we give the kids an activity, and we use the words that they give us to just start to define what properties are. We don't tell them a whole list, we get it from them. Because then you have a better sense too of how fast you could go in grade 1. Maybe they know a lot of this already. Maybe they remembered a lot of it. Maybe they don't know any of it, right? So you can then use that formative assessment to gauge how quickly you want to move. At the same time, we talk about how do we interact with matter. And so we didn't do just objects devoid of what's happening over here. These are running continuously side by side. There was no way that you could talk about objects, finish it, and then go over here, because you're always coming back to the conversation you had about objects and their properties. So in here, what we were talking about is the senses. Now, the senses tie all of those pieces together, like objects. I can feel them, I can see them, I can touch them. All the properties of them, I can describe them to you. So they were already starting to describe in kindergarten. So again, they would have had a perfect leg into this, what we're doing now in grade 1. You'll have to do a little bit of work with them behind the scenes. So the senses for sure are something that needs to happen. So if you're not sure that they know what an object is, then maybe just do some quick activities. That would be the first day that we would spend some time on that. And just, what is an object, right? Just find out if they know. Is it something you can see? Is it something you can touch? Then it's an object. That's a good place to start. But we didn't give them answers to anything. We just gave them pictures, and we maybe buddy them up and say, are these objects? And you know, they might think it's a trick question, that some are yes or some are no. They're all yes, but we want them to tell us that, not me to tell them that. So if they're objects, why are they objects? Why are you guys saying they are? So just getting that conversation going. So an object is anything that I can see and touch. That's kind of the starting point of the definition in kindergarten. And I can leverage that obviously as I move forward in any grade. And what are properties? What are the characteristics that objects have? That's what we call a property. So what are some things that we see? Well, we get color, we get size, we get shape, we get texture. We wouldn't tell that to the students. We want them to generate that for us. So let's give them a whole bunch of objects and say, what could you do with them? So we gave them a slide deck of cards, and I'm including those in there for you. There's lots of them. And we just said, here, just spread them out, work in groups of 2s or 3, and just sort them. Go ahead and sort them. We didn't tell them how to sort them. Again, it's just like the money that we do in math. Don't tell them, just let them sort. And so then you can ask them, how did you guys decide what piles you put the cards in? And you might hear things like, I put all the color together, I put all the food together, I put all the people things together, I put all the places where I got to see things, like it looked like it was a holiday, we put those all together. Or however, whatever they say, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong here. But those are the things that start to generate those lists of words that they're using to describe the different categories that they're putting their cards in. And we want to leverage what they're saying to us so that we can start to transfer those over into, now I gave you cards. A card, there's only so much you can do with a card. And so maybe now, so here's all their cards just randomly put out. Maybe I ask them to sort some things that are in the classroom. Maybe I send them back and I say, all right, these are just cards. Why don't you go find me 10 things that are in the classroom that you saw on the cards or something like them? Because now when I hold it in my hand, that's different than looking at a card. If I'm going to talk about senses and bring them over to the senses, I'm using my eyes to look at the card to make the decision to sort. But all of a sudden, if I have a picture of a can, now I have a can in my hand. Now I can tell you something else about the can. So if you have 10 physical things in front of you and you say, now sort them out, they might say things like, well, these were smooth things we put together, or these were round, or these were heavy, or these were light, or whatever words they use, we just keep adding them to the list. And then we can say, all right, how did you know it was heavy? Like you held it, you touched it. So are these words that we could move over to a column called touch? So we develop those 5 senses with them, with the words that they had. And yes, we can add words to it, but we want to start with what the students are doing as opposed to what we're giving them. If you don't want to tell them the 5 senses right off the bat, let them do the sorts, let them do all these kinds of activities. This is a really short little YouTube, and all it is, it's like a song or a poem, but it introduces the 5 senses to them. And so we just ask them to think, listen, and can you remember 5 things that are being said in here over and over and over again? And that's how we generated the list. And then what words can we move into those? So that's an option. I'll leave it on there if that's something that's helpful. But in the end, they need to know those 5 senses so that they have a way now that they can really give you deeper descriptions of the properties that they're talking about, right? I need to be able to say that it's smooth, that it's rough, that it's very heavy. And then I can get into the context of mass, and I can get into weight, and I can get into length. I can talk about those things, but I need to do it in terms of these as well. So these were just some words that could be used. They're not exclusive in any way, shape, or form. They may not even come up, but they could be words that we could add to your word wall when you're doing senses and you're trying to do descriptors. So these are the kingpins that we want to make sure that they enter your unit of matter in grade 1 with. So again, if you need to do a little bit of bridging, then you wanted to do that. Now that I know what the senses are, what if you gave them all those cards back again and said, just resort them? What if you said resort them and you gave them headers now that have those 5 senses on them? How would they sort them? What would they put in there? And there still will not be all 100% the same. They're all going to see something a little bit different or interpret it. Or more importantly, what you're going to hear is, I have some cards that I think fit in more than one place. Like I think I could put them here and I could put it here. And that's really important for us because we want them to be thinking beyond just isolated events. The world doesn't work that way. We don't work that way. And so even in kindergarten, we would give them a Venn diagram and say, can you find some cards or some pictures or objects in the room that you would identify just by sight or just by touch? Or did you find some that you could use both? In the end, what we were hoping for when we talked about transfer in kindergarten is we gave them an example of, could you go home and find an object that you could bring back tomorrow and that you could describe that object using all 5 senses? So we're asking them to transfer their understanding of senses, and they have to consolidate it to find one object that is a true reflection of using all 5 senses. That's a great transfer activity for a kindergarten student. So that'd be a good starting point, right? And then the other thing in kindergarten is they talk about the difference between mass and weight, but not in the terms of necessarily definition. They talk about it in terms of, I could have a container, 2 containers that look exactly the same, and yet when I pick them up, they're not the same. So you could even just bring in an empty can if you're got 2 things that look the same. I just picked a visual of coffee from McDonald's. It's got a lid on it. I don't know if it's full or not. I could have both of them sitting side by side, but one is full and one is empty, right? So same shape, but different content, so different weight. That's a comparison that they're doing in kindergarten. So I need those are key pieces that you need to extend into matter for grade 1. But also coming to the forefront for me very much so in all of the work that we've been doing is the more I do this science, the more I'm really struggling with where are the connections in math and how are those wordings coming together. So I've actually included a slide and probably will do the same in a number of different areas, but in matter in particular, there are things that are happening in math that we would be foolish not to be integrating the science at the same time. You could use the same manipulatives. You could use the same descriptors that I have to use in math because they're really going to be the same descriptors that I'm going to come up with in science. Yes, there's going to be some differences, but there's so many commonalities that why don't we bring some of this together? Also, I'm looking for commonalities for, are they the same expectations? And that doesn't always come up the same. So for example, we have directly compare the properties of size, length, area, and mass in various objects. That's our science right now for matter. But over here in math, we have indirect comparison is useful when objects are fixed in place and difficult to move. Now, when I tease both of these out, they're really asking you to do exactly the same thing. Over here, they're not saying that they want you to go grab rulers and calipers and anything like that. That's not what they're asking you for. They're asking you to measure. So could you use paper clips to measure a stapler? Could you use a number of pieces of wood to measure the length of your foot or whatever, right? I mean, I could do all of that over here, but that's really what that indirect comparison is asking you over in math too. So although the language is a little weird and it's not the same, the intent is very much the same. So comparison of size can be described using words such as higher, wider, deeper. Well, those might be words that they come up with over in science too. You might say that this box is wider, but it's not higher. That's a fair piece that you need to do. Also, you have over here in science asking questions. That's the first time that that's coming up. And you also, this first time that scientific method has been introduced is in grade 1, but you also have that over in stats in math. Why not marry those two together? Nobody said we had to do stats only in math. You could do your stats experiment for science and link the two of them together. So it's just some things for FYIs right now, because I think those are going to be important pieces that we should start to maybe tease out. So in the matter section, we're talking about measurable properties. So they talked about length. In this case, that also refers to size. It also refers to area and mass. And we're not talking about area as in a formula. We're talking about take a can and put it on top of something. So I'll show you some examples of what we might look at for length. They could be just objects you have in the classroom. Can they create things and are they of different lengths, same lengths, right? We're looking for, are they the descriptors of math, same and different, longer, shorter, but that's the same as I'm going to have in science. Could I use Cuisenaire rods to meet a science outcome? I sure could, because they're can be sorted by color. They could be sorted by size and length. I'm getting all of those pieces put together. And then I can even build, can I build one blue out of two other colors or something like that? So now I'm getting the same thing, but I'm just expressing length a different way. Could you mix Cuisinart rods with pattern blocks? Sure, then I can sort them by color. Or now I'm going to sort them by different shapes. So again, I've got all different ways that I could do this, but I could marry the science and the math together at the same time. I could go outside and find a piece of wood. How many pieces, let's say I take this one, how many of those woods are equal to one shoe length or my arm length or whatever? I mean, that's another way, that's an indirect measurement, but it's still a measurement. Or height. Height is another one that comes up in science. So I could measure my body against Ted's. It's going to take two of me to meet Ted, that's for sure. But that would be a way that I could measure, right? That's just the piece that we have. So when we talk about area, it could be as simple as just give them a grid paper, give them a can, give them a box, give them whatever, and just have them stand it up and maybe just trace around it. Which one covered more squares? That's the kind of area that we're looking for. Or take some areas where they can just put tiles together. Which color covered more area? Which color covered the least amount of area, right? We can talk about greater least. That's all scientific, also math. I've given you a quick one on comparison of those. So again, I've embedded some videos in this. So as you go through, you're going to have to unlock some of the links in here. But I could use hula hoops, and I could just say which one covers most area, which one covers the least area. Or I could take two hula hoops together and just say, go to the classroom and find a whole bunch of objects and put them inside each of your circles. Which circle has covered most area? Which one got more full is what you're talking about. So those are ways to unpack the area. When I talk about mass, the suggestion for one of the tools is using a balance. Perfect. That would be great. But I could use a balance to discuss heavy and light, that comparison. I could use my hand as a tool for heavy and light. I could pick up two things and say, oh yeah, this one's much heavier. That's a tool. I don't have to have something purchased. If I'm looking to do an experiment, and I know I'm adding more in here, but if I'm doing an experiment and I want to do that sort of higher order thinking, there's a great one called the balloon balance, where students ask, what about air? Does air weigh anything? And most kids, if you ask them that question, they'll say, no, I don't think so. So, well, okay, let's see if we can figure out a way that we could check to see whether air weighs anything. So as simple, and the balloon balance is in there, but it's just simply take a meter stick even, two balloons blown up exactly the same, tie them off, same length of string. So your meter stick is balanced on your finger, hand, whatever you're using. And if you slowly put a hole into it and let the air come out, as the air is going out, I'm going to see that that's not balanced anymore. And the only way that that can happen is I'm losing the air because the two balloons are the same. They weigh the same. So yes, air does have weight to it. In a confined space, air has weight. And so that's important for the kids to see. I also included a quick, if you've never popped a balloon, I know some people hate balloons. So if you've never figured out how to pop a balloon without, like, put a pin in it and let air come out without popping it, there's a little video for you there so that you can watch that. Okay, let me just move.
Dear grade one student.
I've also included some, I like to see some reviews. Every day we come back and we're doing something. So if you just want to show them something different every day, it's not the same video, same lesson. Then I've just included some Sesame Street ones, which are nice, but they get to the same thing of mass, talking about weight. So again, they're just in there for you to, as you wish. When we look at the second part, we're looking at the properties. So again, remember, I need to know what the properties are first. I need to understand what that word means. So I can do that direct comparison. We talked a little bit about that already. But then looking at tools, like what do you have in the classroom that they can readily find that's a tool that they could use? What could we introduce to them as a tool? And they sometimes think it has to be a ruler. And a ruler is a good measurement tool, but there's no expectation that they have to use that at this point, but they could. But in here, I could use hairpins, erasers, pencils. I could use all those different kinds of things. I could use a scale. And if I wanted to use some of the Cuisinart rods, I could show how they balance out. I could show different combinations balance out. I could take one away so that they're not balancing out. I could look at properties of a rock, properties of some fabric that you bring in, look at it through the microscope or a magnifying glass. And what do I see? I see different things when I look at it more intently through a magnifying glass. So how are they describing that to you? If I want to figure out differences in size, I could just take string or yarn and wrap it around a can. That's a way to measure. So all those different ways that we could offer them just for, and again, I've included some videos for you. In the world of trying to find resources for you, that's a challenge because we don't have any resources that have been provided yet from Alberta Ed on the site. So I have been in touch with publishers. I'm going to share some of that with you as well, and a link that I'm going to give you for those who want it. But there is one here. This comes from K5, and they have observable properties, matters, and you've got sorting properties. You can use any one of these, all of them. They're freeware, so you're able to use that. This comes from K5. If you've never subscribed to that, it's free. I would do that because there's lots of free things on there. But these are just worksheets, so they would be great formative assessment. This is still your surface level, right? Just do they have it or don't they? If they don't, well, then we want to add more to it. If they do, great, let's move on and let's get into some other areas. So the last piece that we had was looking at the properties that I can change. Like, what can happen? What am I able to change when I have certain objects that we've been playing with in the classroom or on the tables or whatever you've had them working with? And how can I change them? So we've been working with money, for example, in math. Can you cut a coin? No. Can you twist a coin? No. Can you flip a coin? Yeah, but you can't really change its appearance. You can't do much to it. Could you paint it? I guess, yeah, you could do that. So these are the things that we're looking for. How can I change what can be changed? What determines whether I can change it? You know, the substance that it's made out of is going to make a difference. So things like crushing a can, I can take a metal can and squish it. I can take melting an ice cube or the icicle that you saw at the beginning. Boiling water. So these are just examples of some things that we could talk about with them, but we'd want to generate that list with them first. What do they know they could do? What could we do with a piece of paper? We could hold it up. Oh, we could rip it. We could cut it. We could crinkle it up, right? So, but the paper's still there. It just looks different because we changed its look to it, but the amount of paper hasn't changed. So you could create maybe a chart with them of common things that you have available for them to work with in the classroom. And they could do, and you could add to this list here. I'm just giving suggestions, but cut, bend, twist, stretch, whatever, crinkle, like bend, break in half, whatever. Better want to be careful what you have them break in half. On the bottom here, I put a note though, because there's a few people that have already been doing matter, and they said, you know, so where are we seeing like stages? Like where are the 3 stages? Are we not supposed to do that here? And that does not come till grade 3. And so this is that piece I was talking about, that we have to be a little bit more cognizant now that things are much more progressive, and we need to know where are we in that progression of things. So a little different than when we just did an entire unit and it just laid in our grade, and that was sort of the end of it. I included some read alouds. These are ones that are from properties of objects and senses. So if you wanted something like that as just a review with the students, but this one is also one on measurement. If the shoe fits is a great one. So this is more for the grade 1 concepts. This would be sort of a backfill if you needed something for senses. All right, let's go here. So here are some resources that I've gotten from Pearson. I was managed to track resources down in the US. They had some great little science books. I found out that Pearson is not producing, but they're distributing some of them. They don't have all of them, but they have most of them. So one of them is, what does the scientist see? And this one is perfect for what Ted described when we talk about experiments. Here's a perfect one for us. So this is a nice little book because it also starts them to think about, why do we see, think, and ask questions to begin with? Like, why do we even introduce that whole notion of an experiment? And just takes them through the scientific method. So that's one little book that I found really great for grade 1, because I think I'm looking for resources for you is really what I'm looking for. Another one was Sort It. It would work for math, but it definitely works for science because it talks about the senses. Talks about different descriptive language. That's those things that we were talking about. sweet, sour, stinky, salty, like those are all the things in the senses. But again, it helps with the description and properties that we were talking about. And another one was Tell Me About. This one was a great little book because it had little activities of science in the end, but it also really was good about the properties of different surfaces. So now this is rough, this is smooth, shiny, not shiny, dull. So it gets into, again, all of those comparative pieces that we needed from kindergarten that link right into grade 1 again. So it's a great little book for grade 1 as well. So just to give you a sense of, I've been hounding all of the publishers to give me stuff that I can just show you, but unfortunately they haven't been vetted through anybody. No one's gone through them to see if they match yet. So I'm doing that for you right now, is to find what do they have that actually fits with grade 1 or grade 2 or grade 3. And so the ones that I've just showed you are called Sort It, Tell Me, and What a Scientist See. If any of you are looking for resources, and I'm not suggesting you buy them, but I know that some of you are saying, I would love something in my room. If you want some of these, just let me know. I will put you in touch with whoever would need to give you that information. But one of the things that they did share with me is that these books that I'm showing you belong to what they call their library. Their library is called Spark. And their Spark library for Pearson, they said they would open it up for 30-day trials. So if teachers wanted to go in and just see what's in there first, if there were some things that you wanted, then maybe that's another way for you to go. So you can click this link on when you get it, or I can just put it into the chat box even if you'd like. Just wait, I'll do it at the end here. When we get into the resources, or when you get this for your resources, you can go in and just basically grab the link and go ahead and sign up. And that's really what I'm doing right now, is I'm just going through the library and I'm paring down the resources in there. Not all of them fit for Alberta, not all of them fit for our science curriculum, and not all topics or organizing ideas are represented either. So I have been finding other books, like the one behind me right now. I got this one from Nomad Press. This one came from the States, but it works well. It's called Matter. So there's some other books that I'm finding, and as I do, I can share with them with anybody who needs them. You just need to let me know if there's stuff that you need, or if you found enough sort of on the internet, then that's great. Ontario's is very close to ours, Tracy. And Nelson is pulling for me what they've got for Ontario as well. And I also went to Newfoundland, because Newfoundland has similar to Ontario, but not quite the same. And they have a different series. So I'm grabbing from them as well, just to see what we can get. So I'm trying to just get as much of the stuff that's out there that we have. I'm cognizant that we don't really know what's going to happen with resources, because I do know that Pearson is also talking to Alberta Ed and trying to see if there are some books that they have that they could post, much like they did with Mathology, where they would buy the license and then you would all have access to them for free. But nobody knows which books those are, and nobody knows when that's going to happen. So I am aware of that as well. I just want to share that with you so that you know that up front. But in the meantime, Pearson said, well, if you're going through them, can you tell us which ones work? So I'm happy to do that with them, and I'm happy to find books for you. If you're doing a different topic and you're stuck and you don't have anything, I may not be on that organizing idea yet, but I'd be glad to go through and find some resources. So just let me know. You just need to email me and let me know that this is what you're doing and you've hit a wall. Like, I haven't found anything that's really good yet. If I can find something for you, I will absolutely do that. Okay, so that takes us to the end pretty much of our session. Just want to remind you, I'll take you to the site to show you where everything is. And a reminder too, some of you were at the Gizmo sessions and you learned all about how to infuse those into our science. They're going to do another round in January for anybody who missed it and didn't get a login, didn't get a password, haven't been to the ExploreNet site. Explore Learning, sorry, they will do those sessions. So they're already up, so you can go to them. They're free, but it just gives you your login so that you find your way around. Then you know which gizmos will fit. We are still trying to get that working done too, but man, there aren't enough hours in the day, which I'm sure you guys all know about too. So let me just take you to the website for those who are needing to know where to find everything. Do I have it on here? I do not. Okay. I can put it into the chat box here for you. Okay, it's in the chat box. If you haven't got the link, just grab it. So this website, for those who've been there a lot, has changed a little bit. So things are moving around and continue to be changing. If you had a login before, it's still the same login. Nothing's changed. Everything's the same. What you're going to do is you're going to find most of your resources in the top along here now. That's changing a little bit there too. So cohort groups, there's your science. So you just click that on. And that will take you to all of the different grades that are happening for science. And then you just click on the one that you are in, and you will see probably by tomorrow the posting for today's date, session number 3, and all the materials, the slide deck, everything will be in there for you that you can grab, and anything else. Like if there's some activities that I could find that I didn't put in the website or onto the spreadsheet, sorry, onto the slide deck, then those will be in there as well. And all the ones that Ted created for you, all of those documents, all of the things he shared about concepts, all of that will be in your file folder. So you can just go in there and grab them. Okay, and these are not locked down. These are open to the public. Anybody can go in and get these. So feel free to share them out with your colleagues if they're not aware of that. The only difference between, some people have asked, well, why the cohort group? So the cohort group still has benefit of grabbing Ted and I at any time that you want. We can come and plan with you. We can help you get resources and whatever. Whereas if you're just going to the website, you're just getting the webinar, but you're not really having direct access. So that's the difference between the two. But anyway, we are here for anybody that needs help. I hope that that gives you a good start for at least finding matter, and to understand too what little bit of bridging might need to happen, because that's going to be an important piece for what's going on in the future.